Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar titled Implementing Performance Solutions, a Best Practice Guide. My name is Sean Murray, and I'm the Global Head of Sales Engineering at BISAM. I'm pleased to see so many people participating in this webinar, and we hope you'll find it helpful in any current implementation projects you're undertaking or future projects you're planning for. For those of you unfamiliar with BISAM, we are the global leader in performance, attribution, risk, and reporting solutions. Founded in 2000, BISAM has grown rapidly with offices in New York, Boston, Paris, and London. B1, our award-winning platform, has been adopted by top-tier financial institutions around the world. In 2014, BISAM was awarded the Best Performance and Attribution Solution by our clients and FTF, and it also marked the 7th consecutive year in which we were named Best Performance Measurement and Attribution Solution by Waters Technology. Today's webinar will feature Todd Loeb, Principal Implementation Manager at BISAM. Todd is responsible for the successful delivery of the B1 implementation for a wide range of our global client base. He is also the author of No Project Management by PowerPoints, Observations and Advice on Better Project Execution in the Financial Services Industry. Todd's book details how the organizational and cultural aspects of financial services organizations dictate the management of projects within the industry. Thanks for being here with us today, Todd.
Glad to be here, Sean.
Before we begin Todd's presentation, we want to give you an overview of what to expect. Today's webinar will consist of a 15-minute presentation followed by a live question and answer session. We invite you to send us questions throughout the webinar by submitting them in the window marked questions within the control panel on the side of your screen. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can before the end of the webinar. Without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Todd.
Thank you, Sean. Well, today I'm going to talk about best practices in systems implementations and specifically around performance and attribution systems. Now, we all know that implementation of IT systems has been around a while, but still there are many, many examples across all industries, really, about where these projects do not meet all of their success criteria. So the approach that we've documented really came out of many of the lessons that we've learned implementing B1 over the last several years, things we did well, things we didn't do so well. So today we're going to go through the framework that we put together, talk a little bit about how it really pertains to performance systems, and then talk about some key learnings. So we're going to start off with what are some of the challenges in systems implementations. Getting right into it, we thought we'd first take a look at what the overall spending patterns are in IT and financial services over the next couple of years. We can see that over the next couple of years, the majority of financial services firms are looking to increase their spending by at least 2%, some more than 5%. Now, we get this information from the Tower Group. So drilling down a little further, if we look at where these firms are going to spend their money, we can see that 29% are going to potentially spend some of these funds on performance measurement systems. So as delivery professionals, how do we make sure that the money that our clients are going to spend on these systems produces successful projects? Well, first thing we need to do is really understand what is a successful project. What is project success? One point to really remember, though, is that an implementation of a vendor system is really no different than any other project. Success is really measured by how business and operational goals align with the actual execution of the project. Another important factor here that affects success is you have to remember there are really two organizations involved. There's the client and the vendor. So beyond the commercial considerations there, this produces additional project complexity in the fact that there are really two project teams, again, the client and the vendor. So while the vendor team will play a very significant role in the implementation, it's essential to understand that the overall accountability for the success of the project is going to lie with the client team. So as we go through this, the best practices that we're talking about are really designed for the client-side implementation team. With all of that in mind, let's take a look at some of the typical success criteria that we see as they pertain to both business users and the project team. From a business user's perspective, they judge success as if the functionality and features operate in line with expectations, the transition to production obviously is smooth, the project is within a budget, and of course there are no production issues post-implementation. But from the project team perspective, again, when we talk about project team, these are the implementers on the client side. It's really important to them that the functionality operates in line with their commitments, that the functionality is delivered within time frames, we utilize the resources effectively, and there is an effective transition from production to the production support team. So from the project team to the support team. As you can see, some of these success criteria are similar, some are a little different. So overall, we feel very strongly that really any project has to follow a set of best practice principles to ensure success. With that in mind and taking into account our own experience, we've put together a generic best practice guide that really creates a framework for delivering any system implementation. Again, these are high-level guiding principles, and we feel adaptable to most client-vendor implementations and really agnostic to industry or system functionality. So let's take a look at some of these practices. The first best practice we recommend is creating a strong solution design, and this is obviously one of the most important. This is really where you get the opportunity to align the business goals and the project goals. Knowing your client, it's very important that the implementation project team really get a good understanding of what the users want for the end result of the project. Creating a clear project structure. At this point, it's really important for the vendor project team to have input here onto what the required skill sets would be, the experience level is going to be, how long some of these activities take. This is really the part where the vendor project team has a lot of input. Again, leveraging your vendor's experience with their documentation, with their tools. And it's very important to produce the right documentation at the right time, whether it's a pre-project assessment, whether it's your initiation document, your requirements. Knowing when to produce the right documentation and the right documentation produced is critical to project success. We've also found that identifying reporting requirements early and being able to revise them is very important. Knowing the type of data you're going to need, when you're going to need it, is going to help you throughout the length of the project. Training needs, you want to get those identified, again, as early as possible. Deliver the training just in time so your users and your project team can use their training immediately and not have it go stale. And again, a staged handover to client support, making sure that your support organization understands the project, the business goals, the project objectives, and take on the responsibility of supporting the project going forward and the live operations as well. So given that, taking it the next step, of course, different types of systems have different characteristics. And in order to account for these specific differences, any implementation approach really has to be modified to fit the specific project. So in the performance and attribution space, we've really identified a few special considerations that really will help you reduce the risk in your performance system implementation if they're added to your generic best practices framework. The three areas that we consider to be very important and to be considered upfront and throughout the length of a performance system implementation are data integrity, data volumes, and of course the calculation methodologies that you're going to use. So for data integrity, it's about data completeness, data correctness, consistency. There are maybe other types of systems that you could implement that you could maybe get away with a few small data errors. In a performance system implementation, the data is key. We can't stress that enough. Data volumes. Most times in a performance system implementation, there are large volumes of data. If you look at the amount of data that can be required to calculate something like attribution, this is really where a special consideration needs to be made to adjust for the level of data and the time it's going to take to load that data, and again, make sure that it is complete and correct. And of course, the methodology calculations. When you add the complexity that, for some calculations there is more industry acceptance, things like in equity attribution, where for fixed income it's not as easily understood and accepted. The time it takes to agree upon the methodology or the methodologies to use have to be accounted for. Often within the organization there are different parts that want to use different methodologies, so the system has to support these various methodologies and the reporting requirements therein. So again, the methodology calculations and the time it takes, very important when you're doing a performance system implementation. So if we now go back to the generic framework and start to filter in some special considerations for performance system implementations, we can see that, again, some of these best practice steps start to become a little more dense. So again, we talked about creating a strong solution design, how important that was, aligning the business goals with the system execution. Some of the things that are going to be specific to a performance system implementation are methodology changes. Often a client will take the opportunity while they are implementing a new system to use new methodologies, to expand the methodologies, based on the capability of the system. They will also use this opportunity to automate some of their manual processes. They may be doing a lot of calculations on Excel spreadsheets. They will use this opportunity to automate that. They will have to address if they are outsourcing their back office, what that model looks like. And very importantly, how the implementation of this performance system is going to affect their downstream systems. In the Know Your Client space, again, the implementation of a performance system gives the organization the opportunity to really look at their requirements for different types of accounts, for different types of businesses. And all of that has to be taken into consideration by the implementation team. And again, making sure that as you start to build this organizational model, those business goals align with the goals of the project, and they march toward one success criteria. When you're creating a clear project structure, again, this starts to all roll into one of the best practices that we've identified to address the potential for different organizations within one firm looking for different capabilities and different methodologies is to create a stakeholder committee that encompasses all of the various constituents in the organization so they could have a governing responsibility over the project and making sure that, again, the overall project is meeting the organization's goals. And again, very important to leverage your vendor's implementation tools. Again, we continue to stress that the overall accountability for the success of the project resides with the client team, but still there are opportunities always to leverage the experience of the vendor, and in this case for a performance system implementation, we advocate the use of a pilot, an end-to-end trial of the system's functionality, its data processing, its calculations. We find that the use of a pilot project in implementing B1 is a very successful and important step in the implementation lifecycle. For some of the other components, they remain very important to the overall best practice of implementing a system, but we don't see a huge impact to the framework, given that it's a performance system implementation. For number 8, though, the completed stage handover to client support, we found that it's important while you are handing over to the supporting organization to make sure that the process contains month-end, quarter-end, year-end cycles to make sure that the system completes all of these in a timely and efficient and correct manner and allows the supporting organization to see this and experience it firsthand before they take on responsibility for overall support. So in conclusion, really 3 key learnings here. There are common ways to ensure success in overall system implementations. We talked about that. We also stress that utilizing best practices developed specifically for system implementations are going to increase the probability of project success. We said that these have been around for a while, but we reinforce the fact that utilizing a best practice framework is going to reduce your risk. And probably, obviously, most important, performance system implementations must adapt these best practices to account for the characteristics unique to this specific type of project. So it's not enough to utilize a generic best practices framework for a performance system implementation. There are very specific characteristics, data integrity, data volumes, and calculation methodologies that must be accounted for while you're doing a performance system implementation, and that is what you modify from your generic best practices framework. Sean?
Thank you very much, Todd. We've received a number of questions from many of you, which we'll cover in just a minute. If there are others that would still like to ask a question to Todd, please do so in the question box, again, on the side of your screen within the control panel. So Todd, it seems that there are a number of people asking about the specific areas they should consider at the start of a performance system implementation and how these will affect the design of the end state solution. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit further on those points.
Sure. We feel that, again, the most important part and the part that really requires the most attention is around creating the solution design. Again, that's around what can we expect the end state to look at. So again, we talked about, are there going to be methodology changes? What are going to be the multiple methodologies that the organization is going to use as the end state? Not so much what they're doing now, but what is the ultimate solution going to look like? How is the implementation of this system going to affect their day-to-day operations as far as automation? And we talked about that. Are there manual processes? that a client does now that this system either is going to automate or is going to drive them to automate. The downstream systems are obviously important. So it's really the most important things really are defining the end solution and then the roadmap to get you from where they are now, implementing the system, to that end solution.
Another question that came from the audience is about the pilot phase.
Mm-hmm.
It seems as if the pilot phase is a great way that we can validate some of the assumptions that we've made in the project and to see them play out and to also use that to sort of advertise the results around the firm. Have we found that during the projects?
Absolutely. We found that it creates a level of confidence in both the client and within the client organization, within the technology group, the business group, that the system is going to greatly improve what they do, and it's a great first step into a more expanded implementation of B1.
Does that phase, is there a one-size-fits-all, or does that phase expand and contract based on the needs of the client?
It'll expand and contract. A lot of times when we're talking to a client, they will have specific requirements of the pilot phase. So they'll say, we want to see this type of data, we want to see this calculation, we want to see an end-to-end process that produces this report. And that will vary. From an implementation perspective, though, we do like to put a time box around that. We don't want to get into this paralysis by analysis kind of phase. So you want to have very, very well-defined objectives and goals and metrics for the pilot phase, and make sure as you go through it that you're ticking the boxes throughout the pilot.
So moving on a little bit, there's some questions that people are asking about their organization. So perhaps you can just touch on what you have found has led to success and how the client has contributed to that within their own organization.
Mm-hmm. One of the key aspects that we found that led to success is what we've been talking about, this ownership by the client, where the client is willing, able, and wanting to really drive the success of the project and really using the vendor team as subject matter experts, both from an implementation of B1 perspective as well as from often a business perspective. We talk about being able to translate a client's requirements into what it would look like on B1. And that's really some of the value that a vendor project team will add, is taking very specific goals and objectives of the client and being able to show how B1 is going to fulfill those goals.
It seems as if the team on the client side is equally as important as the team that's provided by the vendor.
Absolutely. Oh, more important.
So maybe last question is around the challenges that we as a performance vendor have encountered as we've rolled this framework out to our clients.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you see as sort of some of those common challenges that or the biggest challenges that we've encountered as we've gone through this?
Actually, just continuing the conversation around ownership. It's sometimes difficult to find that line with a client of ownership of what the client will own and what the vendor team will own. We've also found that the integrity and the completeness of a client's data is often a challenge. They may have a different view on how complete their data is, and then when we start to get into the project, it's probably not as complete as they anticipate, and that really is a challenge often. And again, once in a while we will not specifically focus on making sure that there is an end state defined with the client. And again, that is always a challenge. We advocate that, but often the client will dive right down into the bits and bytes and the functionality of the system, and we'll have to pull them up into, okay, this is great, but what is the end goal? What is the ultimate solution that we're trying to create? Once we understand that, we'll go forward.
So all of those, so if we think about project risks for a second,
Mm-hmm.
time is one common risk, budget is another common risk. Yep. So everything you just talked about are other risks that we really can mitigate through use of this type of an implementation framework.
Exactly.
Okay. So in conclusion, we hope you enjoyed today's webcast. We will send you a link to today's webinar when it's made available at BISAM.com. At BISAM, we're committed to bringing thought-provoking discussions to the performance community. Immediately after the webinar, you'll be invited to participate in a survey, and I ask you to please spend just 2 minutes and provide your candid feedback as we strive to provide the industry with ideas and solutions to help you in your business. Please visit BISAM.com to download a copy of the white paper we talked about today. Please follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter for the most up-to-date news at BISAM, and visit our YouTube page for an updated series of videos on topics related to the performance, attribution, and risk industry. On behalf of the team here at BISAM, thank you for being part of today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody.